If mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. It's an old axiom that many would debate, and I can see that. But it serves as an illustration that our relationships do impact our state of mind. It speaks to the power of positive relationships. How difficult or how manageable life is often seen in the correlation to our relationships and how they're working. Paul, in both Ephesians and Colossians, addresses the idea that relationships have impact in our lives. He also seeks to teach us how to understand and therefore improve the critical relationships we experience. This bachelor, who takes some true criticism for his misogynistic viewpoints, in these two passages seeks to help us understand the true nature of our human relationships. And he helps us view them in a Christian context that makes them even more powerful. The text we'll use today is Colossians chapter 3, verse 18 through Colossians 4, verse 1. Now, don't ask me why they broke the chapter there. I can't explain it. Also, we're going to use some material from the last part of Ephesians chapter 5 and the first part of Ephesians chapter 6. Paul is going to talk to us about three primary relationships: husband and wife, parent and child, and employer and employee. He's going to share with us that all of these relationships require submission. Not just one side, but both sides of all these relationships require submission. Now, he lays the groundwork in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 21, where he says, "Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ." Now, if God could submit by sacrificing his son, if Jesus could submit by giving his life, who are we to be resistant to the idea of submission? The way that we demonstrate our submission to the Father, Son, and Spirit is to submit to each other. And that is the foundational truth upon which these passages rest. Now, the first relationship that we look at closely is husband and wife. And there have been so many misunderstandings about the marriage relationship. And one of the primary reasons has been this passage. This passage has been used as a proof text that the husband is the boss. And it's been hurled and misused for centuries. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 18, "Wives, submit yourself to your husbands, as is fitting in the Lord." And I'm saying men have been the primary offenders. The reality is, there's a verse to the husbands in the very next verse. But how often do you hear that one quoted? And verse 19 says, "Husbands, love your wives, and do not be harsh with them." Maybe a better way to say do not be harsh with them is to be gentle, and many versions choose to use that phrase. What Paul is talking about here is a reciprocal relationship, and that's one given or felt by each toward the other. We could use words like mutual, matching, corresponding, equivalent. The husband-wife relationship is a reciprocal relationship. It's that simple. Both make sacrifices for the good of the unit, for the good of the one flesh. In Ephesians, Paul uses the analogy of Christ and the church to represent husband and wife. In verse 33 of Ephesians chapter 5, "However, each one of you husbands, must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband." Both sides bring important qualities to this arrangement. And when that happens, the arrangement works. There was a lady at Guthrie. She was married to an ugly man. He didn't hit her, but he was surly and he was mean. And he made life difficult for her. And in due time, he passed away. A couple of years later, she married a man from the church who was a widower. And she blossomed and she flourished. She was so happy. One day, the other ladies of the church who were at a luncheon pointed out that she was doing the same things that she did when she was married to the first man. She was cooking and cleaning, and she was taking care of somebody. You weren't happy, they said. Now you are. Why? And she answered, I don't know. It's just different. It was different. She was married to somebody who loved her. She was married to somebody she could respect. And even though the work was hard, the motivation was completely there. Verse 33 talks about love and respect. And there's a marriage seminar that's built on a marriage improvement teaching situation that's based on having a more effective marriage with the idea of love and respect. And often when you talk to people who are having difficulties in their marriage, you can say to them, do you love, do you respect? And their answer will be, well, how could I? As we absolve ourselves of the responsibility of doing what's asked of us in Scripture. The second relationship we can look at is parent and child. Verse 20 of Ephesians chapter 3. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Now, you and I know that Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1 says, obey your parents in the Lord. Parents are given a responsibility to lead. And mom and dad, if that doesn't make you shudder and tremble, then you need to re-examine. You know, so often we say things like, the child doesn't have a whole lot of choice, but to be like the parents. That leading parent, those parents have this overwhelming task. Now, fathers get a particular admonition in verse 21. Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged. That makes sense. We know that. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4 says, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Why fathers? Well, you know why. Men who have read verse 18, my wife has to submit. Men who read verse 20 and say, my children have to obey. And they've made themselves dictators in their own home. I'm so glad that that's not as common as it once was. And hats off to the younger husbands and fathers who get it. It's a reciprocal relationship. It's not about dad being king. It's dad being the leader of the home who loves so much that he only wants the very best. And he's willing to work, and he's willing to serve, and he's willing to teach, and he's willing to lead. He's willing to do those things because he cares about those kids. Now, there's something I have to remind you of, parents and grandparents, and you know this. The kids get the last word. That's why the teacher's kid is not a very good student sometimes. The doctor's kid doesn't take care of his health. And on and on and on. We can correlate professions here because the child learns very early that they can diminish the parent by not attending to the things that the parent considers to be so important. They get to have the last word. But even more than that, in a physical reality, the end of your life, parents, you want those kids there. You want them to be the people who are taking care of you and helping you. You want to transfer that power. And the way you've used your power at an earlier point in time is the way you're going to see that power return to you. The third one we're going to call the employer and employee. Now, I know that the minute you read that first word, your mind is likely to shift. Slaves. You're going to shift to the slavery issue. And I hope today you won't be overly distracted by that context. I spent a lot of time this week with the issue of slavery in the Bible. and nothing was clear except the fact that slavery identifies different things in different Bible verses, different nations, different cultures, different times. But what I did come away from was the need for us to study the issue. And so I'm going to do so. Before the end of the year, we're going to look at slavery, poverty, racism, and foreigners. But for our purpose today, we're going to use this reference to slaves and masters as a description of a working relationship in what we would call employee-employer. Now, there is plenty of biblical evidence of voluntary indentured service, and I believe that this is what Paul is referring to at this juncture. Verse 22 says, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord." This is nothing more than going the second mile that Jesus has talked about. Do everything. Do it not only when their eye is watching you, not only when you could win them over, but showing reverence for the Lord. When they're not there, when they're somewhere else, they know that the quality of what you're going to do is because you belong to God. And you're saying, because God has my heart and because God controls my life, I'm going to be the kind of representative of Him that truly stands out. Continuing into verse 23, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters." You're doing what you're doing to serve the Lord. And people could step back and say, "But that's so hard. It's so difficult. Why do I do that?" Well, there's going to be a day of reckoning. And this situation may be imbalanced. It may be even brutally unfair in the context of this earthly life. But there's going to be a day of reckoning. There's going to be a time when you will receive a reward for behaving that way. And those who do wrong will be repaid. No favorites. Here it is as a threat that God keeps His word. Verse 24, "Since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward." That's what you're going to receive for all your efforts. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs. Those people who have misused you, those people who have given you difficulty, those people who have taken advantage of you, there's going to be a reckoning. And the end of that verse says, "And there is no favoritism." The rich people, the important people, the people who in this world have received the favorite position are not going to be there in the day and the time of reckoning. And then finally, there's an admonition to masters. Colossians chapter 4, verse 1. "Masters, provide your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven." Now, it's very possible that at some of these churches, there were actually masters and slaves who went to church together. Both roles were there. And God doesn't say, because you're the rich master, you get to have everything. Or He doesn't even say at this juncture, because you're the person who's taking advantage of, you get to get even. But instead, He says, you need to deal with the reciprocity that's inherent in this relationship. Work is a unique place. I told you before about the two guys that we knew in Houston who had worked together for more than 10 years. Neither of them knew that the other was a Christian. And at a unique event, they figured that out. And they said, "Isn't that funny?" I don't know if funny is really the word to describe that circumstance. I could share with you that on a few occasions, I've had folks after funerals of church members, funerals that I've performed, and talked about these church members, and had people from their office, from their work, tell me that I didn't recognize the person you were talking about. And I've even had people from work say, you should have talked to some of the coworkers when you were deciding what to share. Work can be a challenging place. We spend a lot of time there, and we can spend the time in frustrating and difficult moments that people just can't even totally describe. There are plenty of opportunities to lose our religion, but there are plenty of opportunities to use it as well. It's real easy for us to get hung up in the one up, one down kind of situation where the person who's gifted or the person who's appointed to be the leader gets to do this, and the person who's not the leader has to respond in an inferior way. And it builds a lot of anger. It builds a lot of antagonism. It can do that in husbands and wives. It can do that in parents and children. We've seen that over and over again. It certainly can do it in the office. But this morning, the thing I want to remind you of is that submission is a choice. Paul asked them to be submissive. He asked them to give the gift of submission. And I don't know about you, but it's easier for me when I understand that I'm choosing to do this. I'm giving this person, or I'm giving into this situation, this reality of being submissive. It's not because somebody else is better. It's not because someone else is smarter. It's not because someone else is gifted or some unfair situation. It's because God has asked me, because of Christ, to be submissive. And I try very hard to do that. It's not that one up, one down. It's so hard to get our egos out of this because we want to say, oh boy, that person thinks they're so much better than I am, and really, I'm the better one. Proverbs chapter 6, starting into verse 16 and going down through verse 19. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a person who stirs up conflict in the community. Haughty eyes is the very first one. When I look to others and I say, I'm better, God says, I know a way to help you deal with that. And I'm going to help you deal with that because I need you to be submissive. And when we do so, we know that our relationships take us to the place where they are the most rewarding and the most useful for us.